Stephanie Miller, plaintiff Ladara Royale, plaintiff Mindy Fesci, plaintiff Victoria Deblino Henez, and Andres Henez. Thank you all very much. I want to thank the NAACP, the National NAACP. Their president is Derek Johnson. And I also want to thank the Florida State Conference. Their president is Adora Obianwezi. Thank you for signing on, knowing that this was a lawsuit that we had to bring against the state of Florida. I also want to thank our national organizations, our national affiliates, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten. You'll hear from her in just a few moments. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your time and your effort and strategic advice through this. We know that the AFT has fought on all fronts throughout the country. We also want to thank the National Education Association. Their president is Lily Eskelsen Garcia, who have provided us with legal expertise and support of all of our members, the 150,000 people that we represent here in the state of Florida. And when I say we won, I'm talking about not only our legal team, which I need to just tell you who's on our call today. The Vice President of the Florida Education Association is Andrew Spar. The Secretary Treasurer for the Florida Education Association is Carol Goronskis. Our lead attorney for this particular case was Kendall Coffey, coupled with our general counsel for the Florida Education Association, Kimberly Minchin. We also had attorneys, Ronald Meyer, and thank you for your long service to Florida Education Association. We also had Mark Richard, labor lawyer from Miami, Florida. Thank you for being with us. This win is about our public schools. It's about children. It's about our classrooms. It's about our education staff professionals. That's what the we is today. We currently have our members, we have students, we have administrators that are in harm's way. This lawsuit proves that we do not have safe and secure public schools for our children to learn, for our teachers to teach, and for us to have a way forward through this pandemic. Shame on our governor and our commissioner of education, who have recklessly told us that we had to have a brick and mortar option for every school district, no matter what. Hell or high water, this is what you had to do. You had to open your schools with this particular option by August 31st, or face punitive consequences. This order today strikes that down and makes it unconstitutional. The judge found that Commissioner Corcoran arbitrarily, and I quote, arbitrarily prioritized reopening schools statewide in August over safety and over the advice of health experts. And all school districts complied in order to avoid a drastic loss of state funding. The court order simply stated the obvious. Schools should reopen when the local decision makers determine, upon advice of medical experts, that it is safe to do so. That is all we had asked from this court. Before we went to court, we asked that from the governor, and before we went to the governor, we went to the commissioner of education. The court also found that the evidence was clear that teachers want to be back in school. I have said this from the onset, that we want to teach. Nothing replaces the magic that happens between a teacher and a student. We know what our jobs are. We simply don't want to risk the lives of our kids. We don't want to risk our own lives, and by extension, our families at home. The judge recognized that the emergency order required school staff to make the choice between returning to schools prematurely and unsafely, or in some cases, giving up their careers. The court's order eliminates their need to do such choices. The court recognized that our Constitution requires safe and secure public schools. The court also struck down the emergency order, the language requiring a DOE-approved reopening plan in order to still be entitled to full funding. The court held that schools will still reopen where it is safe, as many have already done, and continue to reopen slowly as conditions approve across the state. What we're simply saying is it is now the control of the superintendent, of the school boards, those local unions and all stakeholders to make the right decisions for reopening our public schools statewide. No longer is there a penalty. No longer is there this threat from our commissioner or our governor to haphazardly open our schools that are under duress because of the health concerns of COVID-19. I want to turn over for a few moments our national president of the American Federation of Teachers to make some comments, and then we will answer questions back and forth. Our legal team is here after Randy Weingarten speaks to us, and then we will go back and forth. Randy?
Thank you, Fed. And look, you know, this is a very important case, but in the midst of being in a pandemic, it is a relief, a reprieve that we've gotten today. Not that in a pandemic, none of these things are great victories, but it is reprieve for human life. It is a pushback on reckless disregard of human life. It is a pushback on politics overtaking safety and the science and the well-being of communities. And I am very appreciative of the FEA and their willingness to take this case, and of the plaintiffs and their willingness to stand up, and of our amazing legal team and the experts who were willing to deal with the bullying that I know many of them got for actually doing this case. The bottom line is this, and the judge said this very clearly in the case. We in the AFT put this report out in April 29th. It was a report about how to reopen schools safely, not whether to reopen schools. We know children need to have schooling. We know teachers want to be in schools. 76% of our members said if we could get the safety guardrails that were in this report that starts with actually combating the virus, that they wanted to be in schools with their kids, knowing full well that brick and mortar was a very important way of actually creating a new normal, a stability, a sanctity for our kids right now. But you cannot replace safety with politics. And that is exactly what Ron DeSantis and Dick Corcoran have done here. Rather than actually listening to the scientists, they listened to Betsy DeVos. Rather than listening to the safety concerns, they actually said they were not going to hear it, they were not going to see it. In fact, what they're doing is they're threatening people. They threatened health department officials. They threatened school boards. And when it didn't work overtly, they did it covertly. And when it didn't work that way, they took money away from them like they did in Hillsborough. All we're trying to do is make sure that we keep people alive, that we protect people, that we make sure that they have schooling in the way that they need it, in the way that a local community requires it, based upon what is going on in terms of community spread, based upon the resources that one has to actually have the safety guardrails. I do not understand why the state has fought us on that when the state wants to have schooling. Work with us. Don't appeal this case. This is a well-reasoned case from Judge Dotson. He understood what was going on. Let's not have more Martin County situations where 8 out of the 23 schools already have COVID positive cases. Let's not have people who are discharged or who are threatened because they make sure that people know that people are COVID positive in the schools. Let's actually make sure we help get kids educated in a safe way, locally done by the various different school boards in Florida. And let's make sure we have a school year where we can help children, whether it's remote, whether it's hybrid, whether it's in person, but based upon the needs and the directives of this virus that doesn't stop politically and doesn't stop for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Randy. We appreciate your support and fighting for us on the national front. I'm going to ask Sharon to field questions that we have either in the chat or that we want to bring on live, and we will direct those as necessary.
Reporters, remember how this works. If you would raise your hand, we will take your question, or you can put your questions in the chat area, and we'll call on you as they come in. We do have a question that Ana Espinoza put in the chat earlier. How will this ruling impact the districts that have already had to open their brick and mortar schools? Do they have to resubmit a plan to the state?
So I'm going to give that to our legal team. Kendall, do you want to take?
Yeah, Fed, am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The districts under this order now are able to make safety-driven decisions. As we read the order, the districts do not have to resubmit a plan. In fact, the premise of needing a state-approved plan in order to get the already allocated funding was a premise that was rejected in this order. So as we understand this order, school districts can do what is necessary for safety going forward.
I just want to amplify that. You know, what the order does is it goes back to the language in the Constitution, which says local elected school boards shall operate, supervise, and control schools. And that's what the court said should happen here. In the face of a pandemic, local school boards in the area should rely upon medical advice and make decisions with respect to reopening, remaining open, or delaying opening until it's medically feasible and safe to do so. So school districts that have opened, certainly if they're operating in a manner that's safe and secure, should continue to do so. If they have misgivings that they felt they were rushed into reopening when it was unsafe, they should revisit those decisions. And this court has given them the power to do just that.
We have two questions in the Q&A box from the same person. The first question is, what's next?
So what's next? We have several districts that still have yet to open. I believe our biggest district opens next week. We're asking our superintendents, we're asking our school board members to work collectively with our union leaders to ensure safety and security for our students. Make the best decisions that you know how, based on the science, based on the public health officials in your community. Get all of the details of what the CDC says, and you can be guided and focused by safety and security for our schools. You don't have to be guided by politics or funding or threats that are coming from any outside entity, inclusive of the DOE. You can make those decisions and have complete fidelity in doing so, and empower your communities. Empower your communities to support your schools and do what's right. If that's a hybrid model, if that's a distance learning model, if you feel like you're ready for brick and mortar, then you do that. If you want to phase in, you have complete autonomy as a local school district to do what's necessary for your schools. And you have the full support, not only of this court order, but of the Florida Education Association.
And Fed, if I may, I'm just going to add, one of the things that the commissioner did recently was tell school districts not to even close classrooms without contacting DOE first. And so I think this has an implication on that as well, because clearly what this judge has said is that it should be school boards who make those decisions on safety, a matter of safety and the health of our students and the people who work in our schools. So I think it's important to even think beyond just this particular situation with these plans being submitted, but I think this should have far-reaching implications as well, in the sense that it is ultimately the school boards who make the decisions in their district.
The follow-up question to that is, what's the future for the schools that have already reopened?
What we're asking people to do is proceed with caution. Proceed with caution and be guided by the science. If you're in schools and there is an uptick, then this order frees all thought, all controls, all guide rails in order to make sound decisions based on that science. So the answer is the same. If you have already opened, ensure that safety is first. We do not have to have the threat of losing funding, perhaps losing staff, and perhaps losing programs through that funding from the DOE. And so safety and security is job one. So says this order.
We have two hands up right now and a lot of questions in the chat. I'll take a question from the hands up. JB, I'm going to unmute you if you would ask your question.
Before I detail my question, just want to make sure everybody can hear me if I'm unmuted.
Yes.
You are.
Terrific. Thanks for doing this press availability to everybody. The question is pertaining to Hillsborough County Public Schools specifically. This is it's one of the major districts, of course, across the entire state of Florida, one of the largest ones. And this is a district that had a school board that heard from local health experts and then eventually made a decision in a 5-2 vote to delay in-person schooling by 4 weeks. Eventually, it was Superintendent Addison Davis who then compromised with the state, and a compromise was reached of 1 week. Just curious what you think this means for Hillsborough County Schools specifically going forward, what it means for those teachers, those students in that district on the same day that they began virtual learning this August 24th, 2020.
I'm going to let Ron follow up on my comments, but I will say this. You know that Board Chair Schamberger testified in our court case, testified that they had an order, and that order had to be changed to be in compliance with this order. And so we don't speak for Hillsborough County. We certainly don't speak for the school board of Hillsborough County, but with all due respect, we're going to ask them to go back and focus again, like they did at the beginning, and utilize those public health officials' comments, utilize the insight of those folks who initially gave them the advice to have that 4-week a period within that. And so we're going to ask them to and urge them to revisit their plan, because again, they no longer have the requirement to turn in a plan to the Department of Education per this order. Ron, you want to follow up there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that nothing has really changed in Hillsborough since it received the advice from 5 medical experts that it was too soon to reopen while the community spread was what it is and the positivity rates were what they are. And so the only reason that they moved forward was because they felt they had no choice other than to reopen schools or forfeit tens of millions of dollars in funding. They're free of that pressure now. And so if they continue to believe, based upon local medical advice, that it's unsafe to open schools brick and mortar today or next week or even into September, they're free to revisit that decision, make that decision. What the court noted, and I'm going to quote, "The commissioner has engaged in ad hoc and unconstitutional decision-making without considering local safety and the medical opinions of experts, local or otherwise. Now, those experts can be consulted, and local school districts, in the exercise of their constitutional powers and prerogatives, can revisit the decisions they have made or make future decisions that are in everybody's best interest."
We have a question in the chat. How many school districts currently have schools open? How many students does it impact? Can schools that opened under duress now close if teachers choose not to come to school?
Kendall?
Well, in terms of the opening decision is now in the hands of the school districts. And if in fact the school districts determine, based on their data, as we've described, getting the best available local medical expertise on local conditions, they are now in a position to make a safety-driven decision. And so that's the starting point, and a number of important things will follow from that.
And I'll just add, the overwhelming majority of school districts in the state have opened already. There's only a few that are scheduled to open next Monday. So that was a part of the question.
Reporters, I want to remind you, you can raise your hand by using the little icon, or if you're on your phone, hit *9, and to unmute yourself, *6 if you're on the phone, or if you're on the computer, your unmute button. We have another hand raised, 2 more hands actually. Bobby, I'm going to unmute you.
All right, can you all hear me?
We can.
All right, thanks a lot for doing this. I'm wondering if there's been any repercussions against any teachers or other school employees since the reopenings, and whether or not the unions have filed any grievances. So I'm wondering if you've got any statistics on that, and also checking to see if you have your own statistics on the number of infections among your members or students.
I'm going to ask Mr. Richard, and then I'm going to ask Randy to follow up there. And then Andrew, if you can talk about the statistics that we have, okay? Mark?
So just to answer the legal question so that Randy and Andrew can answer what's going on the ground. We're getting numbers all the time. We had to sue in Orange County just to get the government to respond to the public records request by our affiliate local union there. And the judge did order Orange County, which indicated over 200 positives as of that date. And it's happening across. Teachers have the right to ask to be treated well, and this order reinforces that. It doesn't directly deal with it. But Andrew, you and Randy, could you go next explaining what we're asking and doing for our teachers who are in the middle of this, pending this outcome of this case? And Andrew has the numbers.
Listen, Andrew start first, and then I'll do the national.
Sure. So the numbers in Florida, what we're seeing, and of course we've been seeing this across the state now, there are over almost 50,000 children under the age of 18 that the state has reported have been diagnosed with COVID. And we also have seen that in our school districts that have already opened, we know in Suwannee County, there's been lots of cases with students and with adults who have been diagnosed with COVID. We also know that in Martin County, there are now 8 of their 23 schools that have been impacted by COVID, students and adults. We have seen that in Manatee County before students even reported. They had a lot of cases where schools had to be shut down because of adults who had COVID and the concern about transmitting it from one to another. And we've seen this, by the way, from pre-K classes to high school classes across the state. So the numbers we are getting, whether it's Bradford County, Manatee County, Brevard County, Martin County, Suwannee County, county after county, we are seeing this information come in. And in fact, we are creating a mechanism we are sending out to our members so that they can contact us directly if they are hearing of COVID situations in their schools, because going back to what Mark said, a lot of districts are not providing this information very readily.
Next question is from Dan Shepard.
Hold on,
Kendall?
Darren?
Yes.
Darren, hold on 1 second.
Randy
Randy?
was going to answer that last.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What you want? So there, what is starting to happen? What's starting to happen nationally is that you're seeing this is the first time since June when you have a huge shift from in-person. 1 second. You have the first time that you're moving from to in-person indoor in the United States of America. And you're seeing this in colleges and you're seeing this in schools. The last big move indoor was when bars and restaurants and other places opened probably too prematurely in places in the South and in the West, and you saw the huge COVID spike. The judge actually noticed that in his decision when he said that even the court hearing was done on Zoom because the courts had made the decision that it was not safe to do indoor in person. And so the Florida courts said this about adults, and yet what you've seen is essentially now a tale of basically two countries. You have one part of the country, and I'm not saying red, blue, whatever, but you essentially have one part of the country that believes in science and safety and is trying its best to actually look at the science and safety and make decisions about how you do indoor based upon those things. And then you have another part of the country, Florida unfortunately included, that is basically saying that the costs that illness and death and whatever is just part of the cost of reopening. And you really have two different strategies that have gone on in the United States. So that's why in most of the places in the North and the Northeast, you're seeing even states that had initially made decisions to open in a hybrid manner move to a decision to start remotely because they were not persuaded that they could keep kids and teachers safe indoors. In the places that started in colleges and in K-12, you're seeing what you saw in Florida in Martin County. You're seeing what happened in Georgia. You're seeing what happened in the University of North Carolina. But there is one other issue that is very concerning in terms of Florida, and you're seeing it in some other places as well, which is the lack of transparency. And so it's not simply coercing districts to actually open by conditioning their funding on it, but you're also seeing people getting disciplined for their willingness to actually tell the truth about the actual COVID infection rate, or health departments being told that they cannot say anything. It's very, very concerning in Florida that we're seeing this. And as a result, you're seeing, you don't actually know the true numbers in terms of schools and how much COVID infection is there.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
All right.
Sharon, if you can ask the media to identify where they're from or who they represent, that would be helpful.
Okay. Dan Shepard, your question was how difficult, and this was for Kendall, how difficult an undertaking was this to go up against a government order? How confident were you that the judge would rule in your favor?
Well, we never take judges for granted, and we recognize that ordinarily it's very challenging to seek an order that says that state actors were acting unconstitutionally. In this case, though, and I hope that all of us have a chance to read the order, the evidence is overwhelming. In many instances, there was no alternative presented. So, for example, we submitted evidence that said the 5% positivity rate is the most widely prevailing safety standard endorsed by the World Health Organization, endorsed by the Florida chapter of the Association of Pediatrics. But the state presented nothing whatsoever as an alternative safety standard. And so if we really look closely at the evidence, which is what a judge looks at, this was ultimately an overwhelming case. It was a case where the evidence showed that safety was missing in action, and that the judge said, as the Florida Constitution says, there is a paramount duty of safety. Safety is an imperative for our children and of course, the educational community.
All right, Dara has asked the question, if the state appeals as expected, what will that put an automatic hold on Dodson's ruling?
Ron?
Under the appellate laws, under the appellate provisions, when the state of Florida decides to appeal an order such as this, it's entitled to what's called an automatic stay. And what that means is the effect of the order is stayed, it doesn't take effect. That puts us in the position of going back to Judge Dodson and asking him to lift the automatic stay. And if he does so, the order goes back into play. If he doesn't do so, or if he does so, the First District Court of Appeal, where this appeal would go, also gets an opportunity to weigh in. Now, I know that Commissioner Corcoran has predicted a 100% victory at the appellate court level. I suspect that some of the independent jurists who sit at the First District Court of Appeal may take issue with that. And those judges, by the way, are also working remotely due to COVID-19 based upon their local decision making. So we would like to believe that if this case does go on appeal, that we will have a fair hearing at the District Court of Appeal, just as we had a fair hearing before Judge Dodson. It would be nice if instead of just automatically knee-jerking an appeal, the state of Florida once again looked at the realities here and said, all we're asking is that local school districts who are elected to serve their local communities be empowered to make safety and health decisions for the children and staff working in their public schools. That's all we're asking. That's all the order, when winnowed down to its essentials, really does. And there's no reason to appeal that. School safety is a paramount duty of the state of Florida. The Department of Education really ought to say enough's enough and take us up on our opportunity to talk. We've offered and spent a day mediating previously. That's still on the table. We should resolve these issues. We shouldn't be just spending resources fighting one another when what's hanging in the balance is the safety of children and staff.
Sharon, do we have?
Yes, we have more questions. I think that answered Gary Fineout's question also. And from Jeff Solichek, what about teachers who have already quit or taken a leave after not getting online assignments? Does this ruling impact their positions? And then to Randy, how much does this case impact the national story about school reopening?
So Randy, I'm going to ask you to answer first, and then I'll take the teacher story. You want to talk about the national impact?
Sure, Fed. I mean, look, I'm already getting my emails are already blowing up with what is the impact of this? What does this actually mean? But I think what you're seeing here is this, and Ron and Kendall and have already talked about this. This is a judge who, is, basically a, fact finder in Florida, who looked at all the evidence very, very quickly and said, wait a second, everyone, safety has to come first in the midst of a pandemic. That's what our Constitution says. And the Florida Constitution requires that districts make these decisions. They made these decisions when it's about a hurricane. They make these decisions all the time. Why are they not making these decisions now in the midst of the first pandemic in 100 years with guidance about how to and resources about how to? But it's simply what we've been asking for around the country. This is not about politics. This is about making sure in the midst of the first pandemic we have had in 100 years that has already killed almost 180,000 people and has infected over 5.5 million people, that in the first time we move indoor, we make sure that it's safe and the safety guardrails that the scientists and the doctors are telling us to do get done. And so ultimately, what I think is going to happen around the country is that in those places where people have actually been able to negotiate and do things based upon the science and the safety, this will be very reaffirming to them that somebody who hasn't been involved in these debates just said this so strongly after seeing this evidence. But in those places where the politics seems to override the science, I think we're going to see more action about this right now, because it is our obligation to actually make sure that we keep people safe, our kids, our communities, and our members. And my question to anyone who may be listening to this that doesn't think that, please stop thinking politically. This is a pandemic. This is a virus where people are getting hurt, where people are getting killed. Let's make sure that safety counts first. After 9/11, Republicans and Democrats together understood that safety counted first. After school shootings, people understood that safety counts first. In this pandemic, safety has to count first. That's what this judge said, and that's what we're going to try to do as a national union throughout the country.
Thank you, thank you. And to our members that are teachers, that are educational support professionals, if you believe that you've been impacted, we're going to ask that you contact your union through your local and make sure that we have your information. We're going to help you through this process. Again, if you have been impacted and you're a member of the Florida Education Association through your local union, our local unions have worked, and I just want to give big shouts out to all of them who filed amicus briefs, inclusive of Sarasota, who filed these briefs, and they are fighting on the same front with us. This Commissioner of Education went across this state talking about grace and compassion. And so we're going to remind him of that every single day. We need to be led with grace and compassion, with people who take care of kids and students every day, who give their lives to our public schools. So yes, we will fight, but shame on a governor who would take us to an appeal. Shame on a governor who would fight kids and classrooms and public school teachers to try and do something that is punitive to a teacher when they're trying to look out for their own safety or their own health or their own family. Shame on a commissioner of education who would spend taxpayer dollars to try and reinvent some kind of frivolous defense when you've already been proven that you are wrong. You lost today, Mr. Commissioner and Mr. Governor, because you're wrong. We won because we're on the side of right. The side of right is about public health and public safety and keeping people alive in this pandemic, in this big question mark that we have called COVID virus. And so until we get the answers to that, let us proceed with caution and let us do what the courts have told us to do.
All right, we have a question with their hand up. Emerald Morrow, I'm going to unmute you, and you will need to unmute yourself to ask your question. And Emerald, please identify yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Emerald, and I am with 10 Tampa Bay, the CBS affiliate, and I have a question regarding a portion in the order that's under the reopening requirements. I'm curious, how does this impact the required services for disadvantaged students that are mentioned in the order?
So I'm going to just be short. No, it does not. What this does is empower our school districts to make right decisions locally, period, point blank. And they will do that. We entrust our school boards, our superintendents, and our local school districts to make those decisions. And they have been making right decisions. What it does is free them from the threat of a punitive, take back. So what our contention is if the order would have stayed, this would have impacted those very students that you mentioned, Emerald. With taking monies from a school district, that impacts program, that impacts those things that we can actually offer our students. And so what we've done is help school districts. We've helped school districts to keep their funding, to make their own decisions, to do right by our most vulnerable kids. That's what this ruling does. It's a win for our public schools in our communities.
Thank you.
We have a question in the Q&A from, Emerald, were you asking a follow-up?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay, From Teresa Marsenberg from the Florida Channel, she asks, will schools that choose not to reopen brick and mortar or have to close schools after reopening receive fewer state funds because students are not in seats as required by state statute?
The answer to that is no, but I'm going to ask maybe Ron to be short with an answer.
The answer is no. What the order does is it says that you don't need an approved reopening plan, that the law that was waived requiring seats to be filled with students during the October count is basically suspended. So there should be no financial penalty to any school district that postpones because of safety the reopening decision.
Randy, this question is for you. It's from Lori Raza from the Washington Post. I probably pronounced that poorly. You mentioned that plaintiffs or attorneys being bullied by the state. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that, you know, the plaintiffs, there were several people that have become plaintiffs here because there were several people we talked to. One second. There are several people we talked to who wanted to be plaintiffs, but people are afraid in Florida. We see that in terms of what just happened in Suwannee, where our local leader was put on administrative leave because of the temerity to actually tell the truth about COVID and about the number of cases of COVID positive cases. We have had to sue in Orange and in other places to get in a Freedom of Information Act to make sure that we were able to get the information about COVID. This is crazy in a pandemic when you actually need to have test tracing to avert a surge, when isolation is required to make sure that the virus, which is very contagious, does not spread. We know from Palm Beach that there was a health department official said that she was coerced into not giving an opinion. We know that Secretary Corcoran has said that you have to actually call his assistant to get a decision about whether to close a classroom before you close a classroom. You can see from this order itself, the original order, that they conditioned funding on whether or not to make a safety decision. That's exactly what happened in Hillsborough County. So how many examples do we need to actually spell the word coercion? How many examples do we need to actually show that it was politics and it was whatever I can't even, I'm stammering, I'm so angry about this. This is a public health emergency. Politics should not override it. People's lives are at risk. And how many times can that risk be ignored?
Thank you, Karen. We'll take a few more questions and then we'll end. Okay, I'll make some last statements.
All right. I think we've answered all the questions, but if we have not, please raise your hand and we'll take your question. If you're on the phone, remember to use we have a hand raised. Katie, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, this is Katie Legrone with EW Scripps, several stations in Florida.
Yes.
Okay, for the FEA, several Florida school districts have reported teacher retention rates this year of a 90% or higher. Many districts, of course, have yet to report numbers. Does the FEA have any information on teacher retention rates this year versus recent years? And in addition, is the FEA concerned that if school districts aren't persuaded by this order to open remotely, that more teachers will be leaving over the next few weeks?
Sure. Andrew, you want to talk about the numbers and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just say this, we don't have from every district right now, and this information is usually very challenging to get at this point in the year when we're just opening. but from districts that have been able to secure this information for, what we are seeing is in many cases almost double the number of teachers retiring and staff retiring that normally do at this point in the year. A lot of districts tend to report that for the entire year, so we're having to parse it out a little bit to figure out what would normally be the case at the beginning of a school year. The other thing we are seeing is a significant increase in the number of teachers and staff taking leave of absences. In some cases, more than 4 times what they would normally have at this point in the year. So we've seen that from several districts that have reported in. Again, going back to what Randy was just saying, transparency is important. And a lot of our locals are having problems getting this information out of districts for a variety of reasons. And so, this is something we continue to push on. Districts should give us that information. They should give us the COVID information. This should be something we think that is in the public interest. It is certainly in the interest of parents and the community to know what's going on in their schools.
Sure, and let me just follow up and say this. We have a governor who has proclaimed this is the year of the teacher. We also have a commissioner of education who has 0 years of experience. Juxtapose that in a lawsuit that they have been beaten by teachers all across this state and educational support professionals across this state. Today, we wrote a lesson plan, and that lesson plan simply said, let's do this with health and safety. Let's do this with what's required to keep our children safe. Mr. Corcoran may not know about that because he's never taught in our classrooms. He's never been an administrator. He's never been a school board chair. We want to be guided by science. We want to be alive, we want to be healthy, and we care about the health of our students. Last year, we started the school year with over 3,000 classrooms that did not have a certified teacher. We came into this year with a crisis, a teacher shortage crisis. We can only expect that to get worse with this kind of treatment in the year of the teacher, so says our governor. Let's do better. This is a great day for our public schools because it shows that teachers and educational support professionals, cafeteria workers and bus drivers and paraprofessionals, and those people who really do the work with our kids, that they're right. So let's leave it at that. And so I'm going to just say this, and I know this wasn't a part of the question because we have to bring this to an end. Mr. Corcoran, Mr. DeSantis, do not spend taxpayers' money trying to appeal this case. We're asking you, let's work together. Let's be guided by science. This is not a win where we go and hang our hat and beat our chest. People are dying in our state. It is out of control that we do not have this virus under wraps. And we can do this together if we do it and are led by science, with heart, with grace and compassion, and not by politics and not by funding. Sharon?
Andrew Mara from the Palm Beach Post asked, what role did the state's order that health directors not advise school boards appear to play in this funding?
I don't understand.
In this ruling. What role did the state's order that health directors not advise school boards appear to play in this ruling?
Mark?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. As you know, in the evidence, it showed that the local school districts were supposed to give input, but then they were silenced by the governor and Commissioner Corcoran. They were told not to give answers. So in Orange, you go to the tables to talk about opening safety, and they come back and say, we have to open because we've never heard from our public health directors. What the judge apparently did is leave it to the school boards locally to contact their best medical experts to get the best. We teach kids how to do science in our chemistry classes. Some of them go on to be epidemiologists. Those are the ones that should be working in consultation with all of the stakeholders, and this allows it today.
Thank you, Sharon.
We have one more question, one more hand raised. Andriana Shepard, please unmute yourself. And which outlet are you from?
Hi, my name's Andriana. I'm with Wink News down in Southwest Florida. I was wondering, how does this ruling affect parents whose kids are already in school or whose kids go back to school next week?
So again, it gives the autonomy of the district to deal with the brick and mortar option. If they believe that positivity rates are too high, if they believe that the health and safety of a particular community is not yet ready for brick and mortar, then they have the complete autonomy, inclusive of the parents, to develop other types of learning modes, be it hybrid, be it distance learning or virtual school in a particular district. And so what we're asking people to do is go back. We're asking parents to go back and look and just make sure that you are in a healthy environment. Those school districts now can offer you distance learning. They can offer you virtual school. And let's make sure that we put all the supports in place. We all know that distance learning is not, let me repeat that, is not the optimum way for students and teachers to actually teach and learn. But it is something that we have to do. So now we've got to put pressure on those private institutions to heal those digital deserts, to get devices in front of kids, to ensure that parents have all of the supports that they need, to make sure that we go to those most vulnerable communities and say, how can we help? What can we do? And what kinds of funds we can get to those particular students who are low socioeconomics, either in our rural areas or our urban areas. No matter where you live or what zip code you are in, our public schools need to be there for you. And what we're simply saying is this: health and safety must come first. That's what this order does. And it gives those parents an option to go back to those districts and say, are you being guided by the science? Is my child safe?
We're going to spend next week really focused on how you stand up remote learning, how you extend grab and goes, how you pressure the cable companies to give people connectivity. All of these things are absolutely essential. And this is the work that we want to do right now, because we have to actually make remote learning work at the same time as we're trying to make sure that schools are safe and the guardrails are there, because at the end of the day, there's going to be a hybrid model until this virus is over, even when you can tackle the connectivity in places all across the country. So that's part of what we really want to do. That's what teachers want to do. We don't want to be in court fighting for the basic safety that a government is supposed to do under its constitution.
Thank you, Sharon.
There are no more questions, so I think we're ready to close, Fed.
Thank you. Thank you all again. I want to thank our legal team, Kimberly Minton, our general counsel, Kendall Coffey, our lead attorney, Ron Meyer, Mark Richard, and all of the legal team. I want to thank again our nationals, the National Education Association. Their president is Lily Esquicin Garcia. I want to thank Randy Weingarten for your endearing support, not only to this lawsuit, but to the Florida Education Association at large. My colleagues, Andrew Spar and Carol Goronskis, thank you for your support, your efforts, and all that it took. But I want to turn my attention to the 150,000 people that we represent, from Escambia to the Keys. This is about you. We care about your health and your safety. We will get back into those schools. We will do it slowly. We will do it measured. And now we have the ability to work with our superintendents, to work with our school boards and say, it is not safe. What are we going to do about it? Let's create a plan locally that is by, for, and about keeping our students safe, keeping our buildings and learning open, but doing it in a way that we can all appreciate and that we all can entrust our public schools. This is the cornerstone of democracy, and this is why we fight. If you are a member of this union, be proud today. Be proud today, because today you stood up. And today, all across this nation, they will hear the voices of 150,000 people and 2.8 million children and the families that they're connected to, that we stood up. We stood up for what was right. And sometimes the good guys win and the good gals win. And today is that day. Thank you so much. I appreciate your efforts, and we will be available for press at any point this week. Thank you all so much.